Hello and welcome to this after action report with me, Sean, from Tin Gaming Network. First of these that we've done, so we hope that you enjoy it. And today I'm going to tell you about an event which I went to yesterday, which was the 17th of March. I went up to the Kirtonian Conflict up at Kirton Games. They're in Crediton in Devon, just a few minutes down the road from Exeter. Been to Kirton lots and lots of times. They have done really great friendly events for lots of different systems. And the event I went to yesterday was a 40k event. All the ones I've been to before have been for Fantasy Flight Games systems, so primarily X-Wing, Imperial Assault, Armada. Always great events, really enjoyable, and can't but recommend them. So I was quite looking forward to seeing something a little different up there. I drove up from where I live, which is in Camborne in Cornwall, a bit of a way up to the shop, but always worthwhile. And yesterday I went up with a friend of mine called Will. Will lives in Redruth, just a few minutes down the road. And it was a bright and early start, so picked him up at 7 o'clock yesterday morning, so nice bright and early. We had a good journey up, and no snow, although it was threatening. And we ended up being one of the first to arrive, getting there sort of about 20 to 9 in the morning. Just a few people in the shop by that point, so definitely one of the first to arrive. Got to it quite quickly, so handed in our lists, which were all prepared beforehand. And they've got a really great loft space upstairs, so there's sofas and gaming tables and all sorts upstairs, so we headed up there, made ourselves comfortable while we waited for the rest of the players to arrive. And the rest of the players really sort of arrived in dribs and drabs over the next half an hour or so, and it gave us a chance to have a bit of a chat with other people who'd come to the event. And for some people it was their first event at Kirton, and for others like me who've been there lots and lots of times, it was kind of a home from home. Fast forwarding a little bit to where we started getting the games together, and we ended up with 17 players, and I believe it was a 20-player event. It had sold out, but there were a few no-shows, and we think that was probably due to the snow or the threat of snow. But 17 players, and one of the members of the team at the store decided to drop out, so we ended up with a even number of players to get the games going, so nobody had to have a buy. I'd taken some Raven Guard up, so it was a 1,000-point event, so I'd taken up my Raven Guard, mainly Primaris list, and Will had taken up a Custodes list. So, going to talking you through the two. We'll talk about Will's list a little bit later, but the list I took was a battalion detachment of Raven Guard. It was led by a captain and supported by a Primaris lieutenant as well. Both of those have got the Stalker Bolt rifles, which are the heavier ones, because they were mainly going to stick around at the back, so a couple of long-range pot shots, nothing really expected from them, but they were there, a little bit of firepower. Troops, a couple of units of intercessors, and no options on them, just basic units of 5, and I had a scout squad as well. So the scouts running sniper rifles on 4 of them and a missile launcher. That's mainly because that's the models that I have, rather than thinking that that's the most effective list. As elites, I had a Redemptor Dreadnought, and that was packing the macro plasma cannon. A dedicated transport, I had a Rhino with a Hunter Killer and a Assault Cannon Razorback. And my other options that I had in the force was a Land Speeder Typhoon, so a bit of anti-armour in there, with a bit of mobility too, because a lot of the missions tend to be quite objective based, so it's good to be able to move around the battlefield quite quickly. So that was really my list. I took a relic on the captain, which was the Armour Indomitus, which I never ended up using once during the day at all. And I ran with obviously the Raven Guard chapter tactic, which is the -1 to hit from more than 12 inches away. And finally, the Warlord trait was Storm of Fire, so a bit of a bubble around the captain, and on a roll of 6 to a wound, you get an additional AP. Into the games, the first game I was up against Necrons, a guy called Rob. He hadn't played many games of 8th edition, and certainly not with Necrons. The mission was roving patrol. It was an Eternal War mission out of Chapter Approved, and it's the one where you start having to split your army into 3 separate pieces, and you randomly determine which one sets up, and you deploy that onto the battlefield as normal, and then the rest of your army you roll for at the end of the first movement phase, and they deploy 6 inches on, and then the rest of your army that hasn't turned up shows up on turn 2 at the end of the movement phase. So I ended up starting the game with the Redemptor on the board, the Captain on the board, and a unit of 5 intercessors. So just 3 units and 3 small units of that. And my opponent ended up with a Necron barge, so I think it's an Annihilation barge, and a unit of Necron warriors, possibly about 12 strong, might have been more than that. So really got into that game and started off really effectively. So the Dreadnought managed to put some fairly serious hurt onto the Annihilation barge and practically crippled it. I don't think they degrade, but essentially it was seriously pounded, so only 1 or 2 wounds left at the end of that first turn. And I got some good rolls in on the end of the movement phase, which brought in everything but the Razorback and the unit scouts, I think. So it ended up being a very one-sided game. So the Necrons are normally stand back and shoot at you, so against Raven Guard they were really struggling with that, and it was playing a bit of havoc with things like Tesla shots as well, because obviously you can't proc the Tesla when you're on -1 to hit. So really it became a bit of a long-range firefight, which the Raven Guard had the edge on, and he was running 2 Annihilation barges, so the one that had been seriously beat up at the first turn, it went down readily on the second turn, and I put a fair amount of hurt on the second one as well, and may have even destroyed that on turn 2. So some serious firepower brought down, and essentially the Raven Guard were just winning that long range firefight. So after turn 2, obviously there's only a guaranteed 5 turns in the Eternal War mission, so I started progressing the Redemptor across the table, supported by the Lieutenant and Captain as much as they can, but it was moving faster than they could. So he ended up on turn 5, after the Necron player had relocated his large unit of Immortals over to an objective. The Redemptor ended up managing to get up close to them. In the shooting phase he wiped them out, and he proceeded to charge then into the Necron Lord, which happened to be within 3 inches of objective, and promptly squashed him. At that point, the only thing left on the table for the Necrons was the Cryptek, and in a moment of, let's call it tactical brilliance, the Cryptek charged into the Redemptor, and the outcome of that was fairly certain. So he bounced off the Redemptor, and the Redemptor squashed him as a thank you for that gesture. So it was a very one-sided game, and Rob was a really great opponent. He had a really good attitude about it, even though his saving throws were awful. So it was one-sided, and the way the tournament scoring was working was you got 3,000 points for a win, 1,000 points for a draw, and no points for a loss. But then you were also getting kill points as well. So you accumulated kill points based on the points value of models that you killed, not units, but models. And in that first game, the Necrons didn't take a single Raven Guard model off the table. So I ended up with nearly 4,000 points going out of the first round because his list was slightly under. So obviously a great and surprising start to the day. I mean, the Raven Guard list isn't a meta list. It's a bit of a toolbox, really. It's able to meet a lot of challenges. Not a master of any, but can cover a lot of bases. So that served me really well in game one. Second game, obviously matched up against somebody who had done similarly well in their first game. And I believe the player's name was Matt. He was running Blood Angels, and the mission was, again, chapter approved, resupply drop. So this is the one where you put 6 objectives down, and at the beginning or end of turn 3, you roll for those objectives. You select 3, and 2 of those 3 disappear, 1 stays. And then the other player's turn 3, they do the same. So you end up with 2 objectives, and they're each worth 3 victory points each. So I was expecting to be absolutely brutalised in combat. I mean, I've never played against Blood Angels before, and I was well aware of their reputation. So my opponent had come down from Torquay. He was one of a group of 4 who I think had made the journey from Torquay on the day, and I'd go on to play another of those 4 players a bit later in the day. So he had a very small number of drops on the table because he had Deep Strike Reserve, he had a Death Company in there, he had a Captain in there with the Thunderhammer jump pack, 3d6 charge. He had one of the named character chaplains, tempted to say it's Limartes, also in Deep Strike. So on the table at the start he had a unit of scouts, 2 units of 5 intercessors, and a Storm Raven. So it ended up being nothing in the Storm Raven, which I was expecting there to be something in there, so I was a bit surprised. But looking back on it, there isn't a great deal that could have been in there. So he ended up with first turn, and he pushed the Storm Raven as far forward as he could, didn't deep strike his units, and the intercessors hung back and were waiting to see what objective became the scoring one. Then Storm Raven ended up taking almost all of the health off my Razorback, so dropping it to 1 wound, so no first blood there. My turn 1, put a fair amount of hurt down on the Storm Raven, dropping it to just a few hit points, but not killing it. And I'd spread my deployment quite widely because I obviously knew he had Deep Strikers, so I was trying to deny opportunities to drop anyone. So turn 2, again, I don't believe he dropped his Deep Strikers at that point, so he just had the Storm Raven up front. In fact, I think he may have, it was either turn 2 or turn 3 he dropped his Deep Strikers, but he ended up dropping, when he did drop them, the Death Company came in 9 inches away from the Razorback and my Land Speeder, and the Storm Raven flew a little bit further forward in its damaged state, and his captain dropped into a far corner of the board, so there was a little pocket where you couldn't fit a unit but you could fit a guy, and so I had a Rhino back there and trying to deny some board space. So what happened that turn is he popped the Razorback, so he got first blood there, and after that he charged his Death Company into my Land Speeder, blew up the Land Speeder, which is hardly surprising really, and consolidated into my Lieutenant who was sitting behind, and the Storm Raven put a bit of damage through, but nothing particularly meaningful. But really the main crux of what went wrong for the Blood Angels player on this turn was his captain, who he was relying on making a 9-inch charge on 3 dice into my Rhino. He failed, he re-rolled, and he failed again. And and that was definitely a blow to him, and I think that really upset his game plan for the rest of the game. So he'd failed that charge, and it left that character looking fairly vulnerable. He was protected by the Death Guard because they were closest in my lines, but then we moved on to my following turn, and I was able to remove the Death Company with shooting, put some scout fire into his captain, dropped three wounds off him, got some good mortal wound rolls, and also then I think the last thing that fired was the Redemptor, which ended up killing him off. So added an insult to injury really, because then he had Lamates, who I think is the chaplain, running around in the back of my lines, but the Death Company were gone and the captain was gone. So at that point the objectives became clear, and he started moving towards the live objective, which was around about the centre of the board and on the opposite side to where my scouts were. By this time I'd done what I started doing quite regularly with the Rhino, which is it's there for no other purpose than to try and get line breaker. So the Rhino started plodding down the board, heading for the deployment zone, and unfortunately in the later turns my opponent realised what I was doing and tasked an intercessor squad with doing their best to stop it. So we ended up level pegging points wise for the remainder of the game up until turn 4. Turn 4 he had a scout squad on the objective, which was causing the tie because I had the other one, and he had First Blood, I had Warlord. So turn 4 I managed to shoot his scout squad completely off the objective, so 5 scouts were killed, leaving it unscored by him. So he moved a unit of intercessors on it onto turn 5, and I was able to direct the remaining firepower of my list at those intercessors. Managed to kill 2 off, but the Redemptor was still to fire, and so on that last turn the Redemptor overcharged the macro cannon and managed to kill the remaining 3. So on that last turn 5 I ended up killing off the 3 intercessors, and that gave me the game there. So otherwise it would have ended up a draw. So another good result. Got quite a lot of points off him, so I think I ended up with around about 900 points out of the game on top of the win, and I'd lost relatively few. So we went into game 3 then against a chap called Colin. Colin was running AdMech, and the mission was Dominate and Destroy. Colin was also from Torquay. He was one of the group of 4 that I mentioned earlier, and Colin had been talked about quite a bit by others during the course of the day because he was running a Forge World model, so he was running an Imperial Knight in a 1,000-point list. So obviously that's a tough cookie to burn down in that size of game, but he was running with a small force of AdMech, so he had some Rangers, he had a Data Smith, a Tech Priest, possibly, and he had 2 units of Electro Priests. So he put his Electro Priests into ambush. He was only running 4 command points, so he used 2 of them to do that. And obviously I spread my lines around, my models around across my lines fairly evenly to try and play the objective game. And what happened then was he lost the roll for first turn. He obviously deployed first, but he lost that roll for first turn, and I think that was crucial in this game, because what he really wanted to do is get those Electro Priests into my lines and take down some of my small squads. And with first turn I was able to really whittle them down. So I think I reduced 1 squad to 5 remaining, and the other 2 possibly about 4 remaining, and one failed a morale test, but I lost a guy, and he spent his remaining 2 command points to keep the other unit, which had been seriously damaged in the game. So he was down to no command points, and on that first round, he pulled out something like 6 victory points because he was holding a lot of objectives, and he was scoring kill points for units. So I think he wiped out my scout squad in that round as well. So he was up something like 6-2, and I was thinking I'm going to have to do something to have any sort of chance. But then I realised he was only running essentially 6 drops. So if I could remove whole units, it was going to really diminish his ability to hold them. And also I'd got that objective secured with what was at that point my units of intercessors. We also had a really big terrain feature in the middle of that map, which made a big difference to the game in a couple of ways. So I had the ability to be using it and quite manoeuvrable to get round it, but he was also able to stand his Imperial Knight behind it, which was meaning I couldn't target his characters. His Rangers were doing a fair old job on my captain, and he was taking a bit of a beating from the sniper rifles. But essentially, as the game progressed on, the ability for my troops to take down his toughness 3 troops, especially his priests and also the Rangers, he was quickly running out of units. So I think from turn 3 onwards, he had his Warlord and he had the Titan and the Datasmith, so he only had 3 units. And from that point on, really, the objective game really swung. And his Knight had been holding the centre, and he had to commit it to where the bulk of my force was, which was, from my perspective, on the left flank. So he pulled it round, and while he was doing so, I was able to take out his Warlord. So again, a few extra points there. And he charged his Knight into my Dreadnought and one of my Intercessor squads, and the attacks didn't go his way, so there had some decent saves in there. But it's a dice game, you're going to get luck. So when he was in combat, I survived. I lost a couple of guys, the Dreadnought lost a few wounds, but the following turn I withdrew from combat, fell back onto as many objectives as I could, and really left the Knight there to be shot at, essentially. And whilst I took a few wins, I think I got it down to 14. But it was really tough, because Knights are tough enough anyway, but this particular Forge One variant was running out a 4+ save and loads of really funky weapons that I'd never seen before. So I just started racking up those victory points, and by turn 5, or the end of turn 5, I was up on 22 to my opponent's 12. So really big swing, but again, because he got the Knight in there, it was really difficult to get points off him. So I think I only took around 450 points out of the win, and he'd taken, I think, about 350 of mine away. So on 3 wins, very unexpected, really surprised, and I think I knew of only one other person who was on 3 wins by that point, and that was Will. And Will was the guy that I picked up at 7 o'clock that morning from Redruth, who was running Custodes. There were quite a few Custodes lists there. I think there were 3 or 4 in total, which is a fairly good proportion. So we'd had a fair bit of time to talk about Will's list on the way up. It's a really powerful list, and one I'd thought about running, not necessarily for this event, but talked about running before. And the list was 2 detachments, 2 Supreme Command detachments, essentially 3 Knight Captains on jet bikes, Hurricane Bolters, Lances, and Will had done really well with it throughout the day. So it would be fair to say I wasn't particularly optimistic going into the last game, but it was such a close game. We had such a good spirited game. We played the Scorched Earth missions, and it was just super close. We were level pegging it all the way through to turn 4, where I think we were both possibly on 9 points. And going into turn 5, my army was well depleted, but I'd also taken down 4 of Will's shield captains. and what happened was I charged in the Redemptor to try and take down a 5th captain, and he made his invulnerable saves, and the Dreadnought ended up bouncing. So moving into turn 5, we was able to get a couple more objectives with his superior manoeuvrability, and I could only get 1, so it was down to roll of a dice, does the game continue? On a 1 or 2 it finished, on a 3+ it continued. He rolled a 2, so the game ended and Will won, and he was a really good opponent to play against. I never actually played it before, but it was a really good close game with some slight comedy moments in the Dreadnought bouncing off the captain. There was also a 1 wound Knight captain who charged a land speeder and got nuked down in the process, and it was just a really good fun game. So many exploding vehicles, mortal wounds of the enemy of the Custodes. Both my Rhino and Razorback blew up, causing a fair amount of damage on the Custodes force. But it was a fantastic game, and we were actually interviewed on the Kirton Games Twitch stream after the game to have a bit of a chat about it, and that's definitely worth a tuning into. You can see it on their historic videos. Definitely worth a watch. You'll be able to see the whole game there, and it was brilliant fun. Albeit we slightly joked a little bit throughout the game about it being an awkward journey home, depending who won, and the slight threat of Will having to walk home if he won. But the game could have gone either way, and you look at these things in retrospect and think, what could I have done differently? And I think there are 1 or 2 things I could have done that would have improved my chances. A little, not a lot. It was just a really good close game and really good fun. So whilst I lost, Will won, and it was a well-deserved win, so I was really pleased for him. So at the end of the day, ended up in 3rd place. The chap with the Imperial Knight ended up in 2nd place, and he ended up winning the best painted as well. I mean, he used some form of colour shifting paint, I believe, on the Imperial Knight, and it was well deserved. So congratulations to him. So the event's over, and there's a really good atmosphere, and people start to drift away from the store. And I think we left at around 6 o'clock for our hour and a half, hour and 3/4 journey home. But before we left, I was tempted, call it suckered, into buying into Legion, which is Star Wars Legion, which is out next weekend. So I think it's the 22nd it ships. So I've bought into Wave 1 of Legion, so I'm really interested to see how that plays. So Will and I headed off for the 100-mile trip home, and it was a really good journey back. We were talking about our games, if there are any changes we'd make to our list, talking through our experiences of those different games. So yeah, really good journey back, and it certainly didn't feel like driving an hour and 3/4 or 100 miles back. Thinking about changes to my list, would I make any? What would they be? Yeah, it's still toying with options. I mean, essentially the list works really well, and yeah, I'm thinking about changes. I've got a doubles event coming up, which is 2 1,000 point lists. So I'll be using my Raven Guard with a friend of mine called Greg, who will be travelling up from Tavistock next month in April for that. So yeah, looking at changes, and the list dynamic changes when you're running a 1,000 point list as part of a 2,000. So looking at swapping in a librarian in there in place of the captain, and possibly dropping out the land speeder in favour of some inceptors. But that's next month, and Greg and I will be up there for the doubles tournament again at Kirton Games. So I think that's everything for this after action report of the event. I mean, it was a great event, and it's always great to go to Kirton Games events, and keep tuned to Tin Can Gaming. And we're just setting up our regular live stream, predominantly Hexwing at the moment, but we hope to add different systems to that as we move forward. But Thanks for watching, listening, and we'll see you soon.